My name is Helen Moore. I am 63. I thought I knew my life. I had been married to Charles Bennett for 7 years. We lived in a small town called Cedar Grove. Charles was kind, not loud. He loved books and walks by the river. He had been married before. His first wife, Agnes, died many years earlier. He had 3 children from that marriage: Sarah, 38, Michael, 36, and Laura, 32. They all loved their mother's memory. They talked about Agnes a lot. They had pictures of her on the mantel. I never wanted to replace her. I never tried. I only wanted to be kind to Charles and to the family. I tried very hard. Even so, from the start, the children made it clear I was not one of them. At family parties, I sat at the edge of the room. The siblings laughed together over old jokes. I kept quiet. Sarah once asked me to pour coffee, and then told her siblings, loud enough for others to hear, "At least she can pour." I smiled and kept pouring. I told Charles about it sometimes. He would say, "They need time." I believed him. For 8 years I believed him. Then Charles became sick. The doctor said his cancer was very bad. He had months, not years. The cancer took a fast hold. I became his carer. I woke at night to help him. I learned which pills made him sick. I flew with him to see specialists in other cities. I sat with him while the nurses changed bandages. I read to him when he could not sleep. The children came too, but their visits felt different. They came with papers. They asked about money. "Have you updated your will?" Sarah asked once. "You should think about a trust," Michael said. Laura talked about taxes. They asked Charles questions in a low voice. They asked if he had enough money for their children's college. I listened and kept working. I held his hand even when they argued about math and stocks. When Charles died, the funeral was done well. People cried. Friends spoke about Charles with warmth. The family looked stiff. At the lunch after the funeral, I suggested we go to an old favorite place, the Riverview Cafe. The owner, Sam, had saved a quiet corner table for us. I thought it would be gentle to be in a place he loved. When I came into the dining room, Laura stood up. She blocked me. She smiled, but it was sharp. "Excuse me, Helen," she said, loud enough for everyone. "This table is for real family only." Her voice landed hard. The whole restaurant fell silent. People looked at the table. I felt a hot flush. I had been the one who changed Charles's bandages. I had been the one who fed him when he had no appetite. I had sat with him at midnight. Yet there I was, told to leave. Something inside me that had been slow and patient woke up right then. I reached into my bag and took out a cream envelope. Charles had given it to me a few weeks before his death. He had told me, "Open this." After the funeral, he had written his name on the front. I had carried it to the chapel, to the cemetery, and now to the restaurant. I smiled softly. "You might be surprised," I said. I threw the envelope gently onto the table next to the bread basket. They all went quiet. Their faces changed. The color left their cheeks. "What is that?" Sarah asked. "It's a letter from your father," I said. "He asked me to share it with you." Laura laughed a short laugh. "He wouldn't write anything bad about us," she said. I sat down. "He wouldn't write about loving children," I answered. "But he had things to say about cruelty and greed." I watched them read. Their hands trembled. Inside the envelope was a long note. I had read it before. Charles had written with his neat script. He had been clear-minded when he wrote. He told stories. He named the small cruelties. He told how it had felt when he came home from an evening. And I was the one smiling. He told how he noticed when they excluded me. He told how he had changed his plans because he could not watch the woman he loved be treated like a stranger in her own home. They read, and their faces changed from shock to fear. Their words died. Around the table, people looked away. The lunch ended in whispers. I left feeling calm. For 8 years, I had swallowed anger and pain. I had asked nothing but kindness. In one quiet moment, I had something I did not use as a weapon. I used it as truth. The letter was truth. That night the children called. They left messages with voices that shifted from pleading to threats. I did not answer. I watered the roses in the garden and patted the soil like I used to pat Charles's hand. Gardening soothed me. That weekend a new call came. Charles's lawyer, Mr. Bennett, a steady man who had worked with Charles for years, called me. He asked if I had a few minutes. Then he said, "Mrs. Moore, your husband planned carefully. He told me about records. He told me that Charles made video statements. He told me that doctors had written that Charles had understood every decision he made. He said that Charles had changed his accounts, his will, and his insurance. Each child got $1. Each child got a letter. The grandkids had trusts. Those trusts were to be managed by me. The trusts could only be used if the grandchildren had a relationship with their step-grandmother. If they spent time with me and treated me kindly." My mouth went dry. I felt shock, but it was under a thin skin of calm. Bennett said Charles had feared exactly what was happening. People who would fight over money and shame the woman who loved him. He had seen it all, and he had prepared for it. I held the phone so tight my hand hurt. I thought of the roses, of the quiet chair by the window where Charles used to sit. He had been careful with love, and careful with money. I stood up and walked to the river. The sun was low and the world felt steady. I planned to be kind and strong. The fights could come. I had the letter. I had the papers. I had the truth. Monday came. I wore a navy dress Charles liked. I drove to the law office. The building smelled of polished wood and coffee. The children were already there in the waiting room. They looked thin and tired. Sarah's eyes were red from crying. Michael's jaw looked tight. Laura stared at the floor. Mr. Bennett led us into a broad room with shelves of law books. He sat us around a big table. He read Charles's will in a voice that kept steady. I listened to the words. Charles left me the house, the bank accounts, and his personal things. To Sarah, Michael, and Laura, he left $1 each. Then he gave each of them a sealed letter. Mr. Bennett handed them the envelopes. He explained the trust plan for the grandchildren, about $1 million and some set aside for school, controlled by me. The room was quiet enough to hear the clock tick. Sarah opened her letter first. I watched her read. Her face fell. She muttered something about unfairness. Michael looked stunned. Laura's face went pale. They read and read until the letters slipped from their hands. Then Laura barked. "This is wrong. You made him do this." "He made his decision," I said. He was clear. Michael had the nerve to say, "You worked on him. You changed his mind." "I loved your father," I said. "That was not my crime." Over the next day the messages came. They left me pleas and threats. I did not answer. Mr. Bennett had shown me that Charles had a stack of paperwork. He had recorded 7 videos explaining his decisions. He had asked his doctor to write that he knew what he was doing. He had explained his view of family in detail. I felt relief that this was not sudden or careless. It was decided. It was planned. On Saturday, Sarah came to the house. Her voice cracked. She cried and said she had not realized what she had done. For the first time in 8 years, I heard real regret. Her face looked older and honest. She said she wanted to fix things. She said she wanted her children to have school money. I asked, "Do you mean it?" She closed her eyes and nodded. I told her the truth. You can start by telling your children that you made mistakes. You can start by letting them come to my house. She looked shocked, then small. She left crying. Michael called and tried a different approach. "This is a setup," he said. "It looks like undue influence." He wanted to hire a lawyer to fight. He threatened court. Laura called and accused me of stealing the children's future. I told them both the same thing. I told Sarah. I said, "You can fight and lose everything, or you can build a real family and protect your children." I watched them think. Then the police came. 2 officers came to my door with serious faces. They said someone had complained about elder abuse. I felt like a coin in a loud machine. The officers were polite but clear. They needed to ask questions about Charles's mental state and how decisions were made. I brought Mr. Bennett. He laid out medical records and videos. The officers watched 3 of Charles's video messages. He spoke very simply to the camera. He said he loved his children, but he could not ignore the way they had been cruel. He spoke about boundaries and fairness. The officers left. I felt like I had passed some test, but the complaint was filed. The stress was real. That night, I sat in the kitchen and listened to a voicemail. Sarah had called to beg. She said she would do anything. Michael had called to yell. Laura had texted a photo of her daughter with a sad face. My phone buzzed again. It was a neighbor, Mr. Collins, calling to ask if I was all right. He said families are messy. He said sometimes people do terrible things in grief. I thanked him. Then Tyler came by. Tyler was Sarah's son. He was 17 and looked like Charles with his dark eyes and long hands. He knocked and came in with a folder. "Grandma Helen," he said. He called me Grandma, without embarrassment. He told me he found letters in the attic. Letters between his mother and a man named Daniel. The letters were old but clear. In the letters, Daniel coached Sarah about how to press Charles for money. He told her to plant doubts. He wrote about power of attorney and quick changes in accounts. Tyler's voice was small. "I thought you should know." He moved closer and put the letters on my table. I read them with my glasses at the tip of my nose. They looked as if they had been written in a rush. Daniel wrote, "Make him sign the trust. Make him feel guilty about the past." Another letter read, "If you want the house money, push him to change beneficiaries quietly." I felt anger rise like heat. My hands trembled. I put the letters into an envelope and called Mr. Bennett. He came at once. He read, and his face went white. Mr. Bennett brought a probate expert, a woman named Rachel, who read the letters and frowned. "This looks like attempted fraud," she said. "If proven, criminal charges could follow. The plan the children had might well be a crime." I felt sick to my stomach and then steady as stone. I did not want to punish the grandchildren. I wanted the truth in the open. I wanted the family to stop pretending. A few days later, I asked everyone to come to the house. I had the letters on the table. Mr. Bennett and Rachel sat calmly. The children arrived with faces like cliffs. They tried to look brave. I put the letters on the table and let them see. Sarah's face crumpled. She denied it at first. "I was under pressure," she said. Then Michael and Laura shouted at each other and at Sarah. In the end, Sarah sat down and told the truth to Tyler and Emma, and to us all. She cried and said she was ashamed. She apologized to me and to Charles. I told Sarah what I would do. "Tell Tyler and Emma the truth," I said. "Help them understand what happened and why their grandfather changed his plans." I told her, if she did that and she worked to be kind and honest, I would not press criminal charges. If she refused, I would take other steps to protect the trust money from anyone who acted dishonestly. She nodded and left with a new weight on her shoulders. In the weeks after, Tyler and Emma began to come over more. They sat at my table and did homework. They read stories over the same chair that had been Charles's. The house smelled like stew and cinnamon. Slowly the children began to show genuine interest in the grandchildren's lives. The long, hard work to build real relation began. After the truth came out, everything shifted. The house felt lighter in the morning sunlight. The rose bushes were thick with blooms. Tyler leaned over the newspaper at the kitchen table and said, "Grandma Helen, your stew is the best." He said it like he meant it. He came to me on Saturdays to help in the garden. Emma made me cards. Sarah started to show up without a plan, just to bring bread or to sit quietly for a while. She still flinched sometimes when Laura walked into the room, but she stayed. Laura was less present. She called once and said she would move away. She took a job in a different state. She still texted with anger and pain. Michael was quieter and more watchful. He hired an attorney and asked questions about contesting the will. His lawyer pointed out that Charles had left letters and videos showing his decisions. Contesting would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. Michael's anger cooled, but he looked at me with a hard edge. I did not wake up thinking about money. I woke thinking about the small things that made a good day. The sound of birds, a good cup of tea, a walk down to the river. I had a garden to tend and a house to keep warm. I had friends who dropped by with pies. I had a neighbor who cut my lawn when I could not. I had young voices in the house again, asking about classwork and science projects. Still, not everything healed. Laura's absence left a hollow. Michael's quiet anger cooled, then rose again at times. Sarah came by often, but sometimes left crying. There were days it felt like I was stitching together a life from old cloth. I was older now. I moved slower, my knees complained, and I needed naps. But the house held good memories of Charles and new memories of laughter. One day, Harold, the probate expert, called with news. The state investigator had looked at the letters from Daniel. He had talked with people who had seen the private meetings and heard some calls. The investigator concluded there was an attempted plan to influence Charles. However, the will and the videos were solid proof of Charles's wishes. The state would not press charges if Sarah told the truth to her children and agreed to other conditions. She had done that. The investigator closed the file with a note, "Family conflict, resolved by truth and by plan." We had a family meeting in the summer. I invited Sarah, Michael, and even Laura through a letter. Laura did not come, but she sent a short note. The meeting was mostly for the grandchildren. We wanted to make clear rules for the trust. I explained simply that the trust would help with school, but only if the grandchildren had an honest and loving connection with their step-grandmother. I said I wanted them to learn kindness and respect. They nodded and fidgeted and asked normal questions. Can I use money for sports camp? Do I get the money if I take a gap year? We laughed and made rules that were clear and easy. Over the next months, I watched Tyler grow. He studied hard at his kitchen table, with the lamp on and his elbow propped. He applied for a scholarship and got it. Emma joined the school's science club and won a small prize. Sarah came to parent-teacher meetings and cried once in the parking lot, but then she hugged me and said, "Thank you." The trust money was quiet in the bank, like a sleeping dog that only woke for good reasons. Yet the story was never only about money. It was about respect. It was about the way small cruelties erode love. It was about a man who had lived long enough to see who he wanted to keep close. Charles had left a letter to me one evening before he died. In it, he told me to live. He told me to be brave and to stop caring too much about people who refused to be kind. He asked me to give young people chances and to forgive where I could, but not to let anyone use me. I took that to heart. I still felt the sting of the insults and the years of feeling like an outsider. I also felt the warm glow of new friendships and the slow repair of a small family. I set aside time to teach Tyler to cook and to show Emma how to plant bulbs. I made apple pies on Sunday and let the grandchildren lick the spoons. We had small parties in backyards with cheap streamers. We had a quiet Christmas where everyone sang around the piano. Sometimes Sarah and I argued. Sometimes she would say, "You took everything." I would say, "I only took what Charles wanted me to have." We would shout and then sit and breathe. Once, in a rare, gentle moment, she said, "I lost him, and I lost you, and I lost myself." I reached out a hand and she took it. It was the beginning of something. Other times, I felt anger flare like lightning. I would remember Laura's harsh words at the funeral. I would remember Michael going along with the mockery. But the house at night was no longer a battlefield. It was a place where stories were told, where old albums were opened, and where a small boy learned to whittle by the back porch. I kept Charles's letters in a box in the study. I read them sometimes. He had a line I loved. He wrote, "Love can be given late, and if given true, it matters as much as anything." I held that line like a warm coin. Life is messy. Grief never leaves you in a neat parcel, but I learned to find quiet joy. I learned that love is not a thing that can be measured by family names or blood alone. True family is made by acts, not by claims. I planted a new row of roses and wrote my name in the dirt. The grandchildren sang in the yard. I drank tea and smiled. Charles had left the letter, and the trust, and the clear wish that I be cared for. I honored it by living kindly, and by asking the children to do the same. After the summer meeting, life slowed to a gentle pace. The grandchildren came for school holidays. Tyler and Emma grew more confident. Tyler started a part-time job at the local hardware store. He would ride his bike to work and come home to tell me what he learned about tools. Emma joined the art club at school. She made paper flowers and left them on my kitchen table. I began to feel useful in a different way. I was not only a keeper of a house, I was a person someone relied on. Sarah tried hard to change. She came to my house and helped with small things. She cleaned the gutters once. She asked about recipes. She sat in the kitchen and listened when Tyler talked about math. She came to school events and sometimes even stayed for a meal. I could see shame still lived in her eyes. She would apologize and then try to fix things. I could not make her pain disappear. None of us can erase the past with a single word, but I could listen. I could forgive. I chose to let small acts count. Michael kept a distance. He told himself he was careful and calm, but I could sense fear under his calm. He feared being seen as weak. He feared the town gossip. He hired a lawyer and paid legal bills he hoped not to need. Sometimes he called late at night and asked about small things like the pipes or the roof. I would answer and then hang up. He tried to be practical instead of kind. I will not pretend that he became a new man. He did not. But he stopped sending angry messages. That was enough for now. Laura did not come back. She moved across the country and found work in a big city. She sent occasional postcards. The last one said she missed the river and the way fog came up off the water at dawn. I wondered if she had softened, or if life in a different place made the sharp edge of anger less useful. I wrote to her once and did not get an answer. That hurt, but I stopped waiting. Word spread in Cedar Grove. People who knew Charles and who knew me came by with casseroles and stories. Old neighbors visited and told me about the youthful days when Charles and Agnes used to dance in the living room. A couple who lived down the lane brought over a quilt Charles had liked. They draped it over the couch. The town surprised me with small comforts. It reminded me I was not entirely alone. One quiet afternoon, Tyler knocked at the back door with a flyer. The high school was having a science fair. He wanted to enter a project on river chemistry. He had found a problem near the old bridge and wanted to test water samples. I helped him label jars and make notes. We worked late into the afternoon. He stayed focused and proud. When the day of the fair came, he won a small ribbon. He ran to show me. His smile was wide and pure. I felt warm pride I had not known in years. Emma joined a children's choir. She practiced at my house often. Her voice was clear and honest. Once she asked me about Agnes, about the woman whose picture always sat on the mantel. I told her a few simple stories I had heard about Agnes. I spoke about kindness and how love can last. Emma listened like a small student. "Did Grandpa love you?" she asked one day. I thought for a moment. "Yes," I answered. "He loved me, and he loved your grandma." People can love more than one person in different ways. At night, when the house was quiet and the moon was bright, I would sit with Charles's letters by the lamp. I read the lines he had written years before. He had a way of naming small things. He loved the soft chair by the window. He loved when the cat would sleep across the newspaper. He wrote that he was proud of the way we had planted the maple tree together. Those small notes made the house feel like a map of two people's life. I kept them safe. The trust fund became a quiet presence, like a locked chest for a future that might help someone go to college. Tyler applied to a community college and got accepted. The trust would cover books and tuition. He called me with tears when the acceptance letter came. "You've given me a chance," he said. I told him Charles had given it. He had also left instructions that the money should be spent responsibly. We talked about saving and about simple budgets. Tyler listened. He would visit the bank with me and sign the rules that showed how the trust worked. He stood like a young man ready to step out into the world. Not all days were gentle. There were mornings when the past returned like fog. I would think of the restaurant that day, of Laura's harsh words, of Michael's cold face. Those memories stung. I allowed myself to feel the sting, and then I let it pass like a weather front. I found it helped to put my hands in the soil and plant bulbs. Planting was an act of faith. It said there would be more seasons. One evening, I received a call from a woman at the local community center. She wanted someone to speak about elder care and family. "Would you talk about your experience?" she asked. I hesitated. Public talks were not my thing, but I said yes. I thought if my story could help someone else, then sharing would be a good thing. The room filled with people who had been through loss, and with people who wanted to understand how to care for elders well. I spoke simply about respect and boundaries and the ways small cruelties can hurt. Afterward, an older woman came up and hugged me. "Thank you," she said. "You gave us a lesson about love." I felt both proud and calm. Slowly, the wounds turned from open sore to old scar. The kind of scar you know is there, but that does not stop you from moving. I spent more time with friends. I wrote letters to people I had not seen in years. I mended a friendship with my sister, who lived 2 towns away. It felt good to rebuild small bridges. The house, too, kept changing. I repainted the guest room and put up a new lamp. I cooked new recipes and learned to make a lemon tart. The small kitchen smelled like sugar and butter, and children came to sit by the table. At night, I sometimes dreamed of Charles standing by the river and waving. I had no guilt left that mattered. I had given the best years I could. I had walked through grief and came out with a softer heart. The grandchildren grew, and the town kept its small rhythms. Life in Cedar Grove went on, steady as the river. Autumn came with a crisp edge. The maple tree we had planted with Charles turned gold. One morning, I walked down to the river and watched leaves float by. Tyler had started a car mechanic course at the community college. He came home once with grease on his hands and a grin. "I got my first small job fixing brakes," he told me. I felt proud to see a young person learn to work with his hands. The house filled with new sounds. The laughter of teenagers and the clank of tools in the garage. Sarah began to take on small community roles. She volunteered at the school and joined the PTA. She was not the same proud woman who once threw away cookies I had baked. She was quieter and more careful. Sometimes she would look at me as if trying to find the right words. I saw her try to be honest with herself. She promised to give the children a more honest family story. That promise mattered. Michael kept his distance, but he sent postcards from a business trip and a note that said he would help Tyler with a reference for a job. I read the note twice. It was his way of staying connected without saying too much. I appreciated that small kindness. Laura still wrote sometimes and sent pictures of sunsets in the city. Her letters were short but less sharp. I held on to those small changes. I knew they mattered even if they were slow. The trust was used carefully. Tyler signed for books and a small computer for school. Emma used money for art supplies. I asked each child to write a short plan for how they would use the money. I wanted to make sure the funds were used to grow and not to spend on one-night pleasures. They took the responsibility seriously. The money in the bank felt lighter when it served learning and not drama. One winter, the community center asked me to lead a small cooking group for older people. We met once a week. I taught easy recipes, and we talked about day-to-day troubles. The group became a small circle of friends. We shared grief and help. One of the women, Mrs. Greer, brought a pie to my house once and said, "You have a way with young people." I laughed and felt gratitude. I had not seen my life as a place of learning, but it was. Tyler applied for a scholarship that required a short essay. He asked me to read it. His words were honest and full of worry and hope. He wrote about the river, about work at his dad's old barn, about how he wanted to be useful. I helped him check grammar and helped him feel confident. When he got the scholarship, he ran into the house and hugged me like a small boy. We cried together for a moment. It felt like a blessing. Laura visited once for a weekend. She brought a quiet friend and seemed to carry less anger. She walked the garden and picked a few roses. We sat on the porch and watched the sky. She said, "I have been thinking about the garden." I did not ask for more. I let her tell what she wanted. She said sorry in a small voice. I said it was okay. We both knew it was not only about a single sorry. It was about the slow work of rebuilding trust and truth. She left with a small pot of begonias. I placed them on the kitchen sill. In spring, the school offered a small prize to students who helped elders with technology. Tyler taught Mrs. Greer how to use a tablet to video chat with her daughter. Emma helped an older woman write an email. Watching these small acts touched me deeply. The grandchildren used their skills to bridge a gap between ages. They learned to be gentle and helpful. That was more valuable than any money. Sometimes old hurt bubbled up. Once Michael accused me sharply in front of a neighbor of being sly with money. I felt heat rise and my hands trembled. I walked away and then wrote him a letter calmly. I said I would not accept insults. I said I would not argue in public. I suggested we speak quietly about problems if he had them. He wrote back a stiff note and then later dropped off a box of tools for Tyler. It was a small truce. The town celebrated a picnic on the river that summer. I made a lemon tart and wrapped it in wax paper. Tyler and Emma helped me carry it. Sarah came with her children and looked nervous but happy. Michael came for a short while and waved from across the lawn. Laura sent a postcard that said she was glad to hear life was kinder. I sat under the maple tree and watched the grandchildren run. The picnic smelled of fried chicken and laughter. I felt a peace that did not pretend all had been mended, but that trusted the slow work of repair. Charles' letters still rested in the study. They were a map and a comfort. I sometimes read his line, "Love freely now." Those words were a small command. They told me to let go of the tightness that grief makes and to open to new small joys. I started to write short notes to people who helped me. I wrote to Mr. Collins and to a young nurse who had been kind at the clinic. Writing made me feel like I could spread warmth like seeds. A few nights later, I walked to the old bridge and sat on the bench we once used. The river ran steady and the stars were bright. I felt a memory of Charles's hand in mine. I spoke aloud to him, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. "You were right to be careful," I said. "You did the right thing for the children and for the grandchildren." I felt a gentle breeze answer. I got up and walked home with the soft sound of leaves under my feet. In time, people stopped talking about the court and the will. The town moved on to other stories. Harvest festivals, a school play, a sudden storm that knocked down a power line. Small things filled the days. The grandchildren learned to bake bread. Tyler got a better job at a garage and saved a little money. He came to me once and said, "I want to buy a small car." I helped him look at options. We sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, and we made a list of pros and cons. We checked the trust rules to see what support he could get for transportation to school. It felt good to plan together. Sarah started a small after-school program for kids. She used part of her own salary and small donations. She called it Little Hands. She asked me to come and teach a week on simple cooking. I brought a small apron and a rolling pin. The children laughed and made messy dough. I saw a small version of the kitchen table where the grandchildren once gathered. Sarah told me later that the program helped her feel close to the children in a new way. I felt proud and gentle. Michael's visits became less tense. He once came and sat on the back porch without saying much. We drank tea in silence. He then said, "You were right about the kids." He told me he had watched Tyler fix a lawnmower and had felt a strange pride. He said he wanted to support Tyler's upcoming apprenticeship. That was a small but important change. I thanked him and we patted the dog. Simple words can sometimes clear a room like air. Laura wrote more letters. She told me about the city and a small gallery where she sold prints. She sent a few pictures of a sunrise over tall buildings. Each letter ended with a small line. "I think of the river sometimes." I wrote back and told her about the rose bushes. We exchanged short stories of the places we loved. The distance made apologies easier sometimes, and small kindness flowed across miles. One winter, Tyler called and said he had met someone. Her name was Hannah, and she loved the river too. She worked in a small bookshop. Tyler asked if he could bring her by. I said yes. When Hannah arrived, she carried a book about river birds and a quiet smile. She thanked me for tea and sat like a person who fit the room. They walked at the river and came back, holding hands. I watched them and felt that life had a way of turning toward light. At the community center, I began to lead a small class on writing letters. People came with pages full of memories they wanted to send to people who mattered. A man brought a scrapbook of old farm photos. A young woman wrote to a soldier. I taught them to write simply and from the heart. The room filled with papers and soft conversation. I felt that my story could help others shape theirs. One spring, I found a small black and white picture in an old box. It showed Charles and Agnes dancing in the yard with young faces. I placed that picture by the lamp and told Tyler about the day they planted the maple tree. He listened like a small historian. He said, "It is good to keep these things." I nodded and felt the truth in his words. Sometimes I still had moments of anger that surprised me. I would think of the harsh words at the funeral and the way they had tried to make a home into a battlefield. I would feel old pain like a door that would not close completely. In those moments, I would go to the garden and pull out a weed or water a rose bush. Gardening taught me patience. It taught me that growth can be slow and beautiful. As the years passed, Tyler finished his apprenticeship and began working steady hours. He called one night and said he wanted to help me with small repairs around the house. "I'd like to fix the railing on the porch," he said. I felt proud and asked him to bring his tools. We worked together over a weekend. He climbed the ladder like a careful adult. We ate sandwiches on the porch and talked about his future. He said he wanted to travel for a short time and then come back to open a small repair shop. I encouraged him. "Do what you love," I said. He smiled and we put the tools away. Emma kept drawing. Her art filled the fridge door. She painted small birds and odd houses. She grew into a bright artist. I sometimes framed a drawing and hung it in the kitchen. It made the house feel young again. People who visited would notice the paintings and ask about the artist. I would tell them Emma's name, and I felt a small pride. There were times when the children would say, "We still hurt." We would sit and listen. Hurt does not vanish with time. It softens and becomes memory. I told them I had hurt, too. I told them the truth that a last letter cannot fix the slow work of love. We must do it together. They nodded and reached for small things. A call, a visit, a pie on a rainy day. Each small act knitted a new cloth. The trust money remained in the bank, quiet like a sleeping fund that woke for study fees and books and small travel costs. I watched it support learning. It felt right. Money became a tool, not a prize to fight for. In quiet moments, I would think of Charles and his carefulness. He had planned not for the day he died, but for the way people would live after him. In his wisdom, he had built a bridge. We all had to cross it. Years moved forward with a quiet pace. Tyler grew into his 20s and took on more responsibility. He bought a small, reliable car and sometimes drove Hannah home after her late shift at the bookstore. Emma entered a regional art show and won a small prize. I sat with a knitting shawl across my lap and watched the grandchildren build lives that were kind and steady. Sarah remarried a man from a nearby town who liked gardens and simple dinners. It was not a loud romance. It was small and steady. She and her husband sometimes came to dinner and helped with the yard. Michael visited for holidays. He brought his children and they ate at the table and told noisy stories. He still looked at me with a careful face, but less hardness lived in his voice. Laura sent postcards about a gallery show in which her prints hung. "Come visit," she wrote once. I thought about taking a bus to the city for a short visit, just to see her work in a gallery. It felt like a step toward something new. She had been angry long ago, but art had softened her edges. She wrote that she kept a small sketchbook and drew the river sometimes in memory. I answered and told her that I would come someday. The trust funds had been used carefully. Each child who used the money for school sent notes of thanks that felt honest. They wrote about teachers who inspired them and classes that changed their minds about work. The grandchildren carried that gift like a lamp, lighting simple steps forward. It gave me joy to know the money helped build futures rather than fuel fights. One warm evening, the community center held a small ceremony to honor local volunteers. I sat among people whose lives I had touched with small recipes and kind words. Tyler came with Hannah, and stood next to me while the mayor read names. He applauded politely. Afterward, people came to talk. A woman from the school asked how to start a kitchen club. A young father thanked me for helping him learn to can tomatoes. The circle of people who shared simple help felt like a good harvest. Sometimes the old wounds would return, not as sharp edges but as a dull ache. I would remember the day in the restaurant when Laura had said the table was for real family only. I would remember the way the law office had felt like a place of final words. I allowed the memory to be a teacher. It showed me how cruelty lived in small acts and how important it is to name it. At other moments, simple pleasures filled the house. I liked to tuck a warm towel around a child who had come in wet from rain. I liked to make a pot of tea and sit on the couch while Emma explained a new painting. I liked to watch Tyler change a flat tire and laugh with the neighbor boy who had come to watch. These small scenes stitched together a life that was close and real. One autumn morning I found a letter from Charles I had missed earlier. He had written a note to be read when I felt lonely. It said, "If trouble comes, find food to share and a friend to listen." I folded the paper and placed it in my pocket. That day I made a loaf of bread and took it to the community center potluck. People ate and talked and told stories. I felt less lonely and more anchored. In the years that followed, the house was often full. Parties were small and warm. The garden yielded roses and beans. Tyler fixed things and sometimes taught neighbors to fix a leaky pipe. Emma sold a few prints and bought herself a paint set. Sarah's after-school project grew and now had volunteers helping. Michael once helped run a fundraiser and seemed to take pride in the work. Laura sent photos of a small show with her prints framed. She wrote that the city had taught her new shapes to draw. We all changed slowly. People made mistakes. People tried to mend them. The trust money stayed out of fights because the rules were clear. The grandchildren used the funds for learning and for small life needs. The family, imperfect as it was, became a quilt stitched with uneven but honest squares. I often walked to the river and sat on the bench. The river had always kept flowing. It taught me that change comes with the steady flow of water, not with hurried storms. I watched small things, a duck with a ragged wing mending itself, a boy skipping stones, a woman selling flowers at dawn. Life had a quiet rhythm, and I found my place in it. Sometimes strangers would come to my door and say they had heard my story at the community center. They wanted advice on handling family conflict or estate planning. I urged them to speak honestly and to plan with care. I told them to leave clear instructions if they could. I said old things simply: be kind, write your wishes clearly, and build bridges where possible. People listened. When I grew tired, I took long naps in the sunroom. I read books Charles had loved and new ones the grandchildren brought. I felt the presence of both past and present. In the evenings, the house smelled of soup and the sound of laughter. I kept Charles's letters under a lamp to read sometimes. When the night was long, his words were a map and a comfort. They reminded me that a life of patience and care can create new paths for others. The years taught me many things. I learned that holding on to anger tightens the hands and dims the eyes. I learned that small acts of kindness, a pie, a visit, a phone call, can soften days. I learned that truth matters. Charles's honesty in his letters and videos had been the anchor through the storm. It gave the town a chance to see clearly and allowed the grandchildren to grow without the burden of endless fighting. Tyler graduated from a technical school. He sent me a picture of himself in a new uniform and a small note: "Thank you for believing." I pinned that picture to the fridge. Emma gave me a painting for my birthday, a small river under a silver moon. I hung it in the dining room and looked at it each morning while I drank tea. The painting was a reminder that even small hands can make beauty. Sarah stopped apologizing as often and started answering with honest words. She would tell me when she needed help and ask me questions about recipes. Michael became a steady presence on holidays and often brought his children to rake leaves in the yard. Laura wrote letters and sent pictures, and though she still lived far away, she called sometimes about small things like where to buy a good pie or how to prune roses. These were not perfect relations, but they were human and alive. One summer, the town held a small ceremony at the river to name a bench after Charles. They hung a small plaque with his name and a line about how he loved the river and the people who lived by it. Friends came and some of the school teachers gave short speeches. I sat in the front row with Tyler and Emma, and I felt that part of his life had been honored. After the ceremony, people came to talk and to say simple thanks. Some spoke of lessons learned about respect and kindness. I smiled and nodded, and felt a warm peace. As I grew older, I found small pleasures every day. I made jam in the late summer and gave jars to neighbors. I read aloud to the grandchildren when they were young, and later listened to them read to me when my eyes felt tired. I walked slowly to the river and remembered the way Charles would take my hand and say nothing at all. Silence does not always mean emptiness. Sometimes it means peace. I kept a small list of things that mattered to me. The river, the roses, the sound of laughter, honest letters, small gifts of time. I taught the grandchildren to write thank you notes and to plant a tree for each birthday. We planted a small row of apple saplings together. They were young and vulnerable and required attention. I tended them like a promise. Sometimes, on a quiet night, I would take out Charles's letters and read them again. He had written that he hoped I would find peace, and that I would not spend my days trying to win people who refused to be kind. He had told me to live freely and teach others to do the same. I had followed that small instruction. I had built a home that held both sorrow and joy. I had made room for young people to grow and for old wounds to soften. When I thought of the past cruelty, I did not feel triumphant. My feeling was softer, like a final understanding. I saw how children can guard memories like treasures and sometimes become hard because they do not know how to grieve. I saw how love can grow later in life, when people are willing to change. I had been part of that change. In the end, what mattered to me was simple. The grandchildren had chances to learn. Tyler fixed a small truck for an elderly neighbor and learned responsibility. Emma sold a print and used the money to buy paints. Sarah and Michael learned that small acts of kindness could mend some old damage. Laura found her peace in drawing city skies. Charles' careful words still guided us, like a map. I sat on the back porch one last summer afternoon with a cup of tea and felt grateful. The roses smelled sweet. The grandchildren played nearby. The river ran its steady path. I thought of the letter I had read in the restaurant years ago and of the careful plans Charles had made. He had done his best to protect what mattered. I had done my best to live with truth and to teach a little kindness. If you ask me what was in that letter he left me, I will say simply, honesty, love, and a request to live freely. He wrote about how he saw things and what he wanted for the grandchildren. He wrote so that truth would stand when words could have been twisted. In giving me that letter, and in making careful plans, he gave the family a chance to rebuild on firmer ground. I am Helen Moore. I have lived a full life with sorrow and with gifts. I watch young people grow and old friends rest. I keep a small stack of letters in my study, and I read them now and then. I teach others what I learned about kindness, about truth, and about the small acts that make a home. The river keeps flowing, and so do we. Life moves on, gentle and sure, like water over stones.